On today's show, Alperen Sengun for Chet Holmgren trade challenge, and why the Rockets and Thunder both might actually consider pulling the trigger on a deal. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. And joining us now is a local reporter, Cron.com's Michael Shapiro. You can track down on Twitter at mshap, to discuss a pretty fun, I think, hypothetical, one that we're going to certainly have some fun with here on the program, one that was suggested by none other than Zach Lowe, the man himself, the myth, the legend, on his very own podcast. So let's go ahead and actually, I'm going to run that clip back just to kind of set the table for what we're going to be discussing all throughout today's episodes. Let's go ahead and hear from Zach Lowe right now.
Interesting. Would you do a Chet for Alperen Sengun challenge trade? And I only mentioned Sengun because the salaries are similar. The size element is satisfied. And Sengun does seem to be the opposite of Chet in just this one specific thing. He loves going into Victor Wembanyama's face and chest and stomach. And like, he legitimately seems offended by the idea that people think Victor Wembanyama can do anything to his crazy, pivotty, physical, under-the-rim game. And it, like, kind of goes at him a little bit. Yeah. Again, hasn't proven the range you need to exist with Hartenstein, but has a little bit of the DHO passing. Like, sometimes a three-point shot looks good. I think it's just too seismic of a change for either team to really contemplate. But it's like, not uninteresting. Yeah.
Not uninteresting is a great way to put it, Michael, because I'll be completely honest. When I first saw this clip circulating from Zach Lowe and everything, I immediately was like, of course, no, of course not. Both teams would say no. And then as I kind of sat there and sat with it, because this happened about a week ago, right? So I've been sitting on this for about a week. And the more that I've thought about it, the more that I keep thinking, there are some very legitimate reasons on both sides why both teams would be interested in this trade. Give me your immediate thoughts and reaction to Zach Lowe even suggesting something this out of the box, crazy, whatever.
You know, I think ultimately we will come to the conclusion maybe at the end of this podcast that both teams wouldn't go for it and make that crazy leap. But it totally makes sense on paper when you think about it. Alperen to Oklahoma City, Chet to Houston solved a lot of both teams' flaws ultimately. I think we'll get into this, especially I think for the Rockets, where you look at they don't have vertical spacing, they don't have horizontal spacing, their center point guard combo is pretty poor defensively. Aren't those all the things that Chet Holmgren would kind of solve? So for me, outright, I didn't dismiss it. I thought it was funny to see both Thunder Twitter and Rockets Twitter get absolutely enraged. Pretty solid idea by Zach. I definitely think it's something that is at least a very fun part of the game to discuss.
You know, it's a solid idea when everybody's pissed off. Like, that's the thing, is like that is when you have absolutely nailed a hypothetical or a trade proposal or a rumor or any of that, just because then when everybody's angry, you're like, all right, you know, clearly this is a, I don't know, bipartisan issue, whatever. But, I mean, it works out too, because you got the red Rockets, the blue OKC Thunder. Anyways, I digress. So looking at it, like, let's look at it from a Rockets perspective first, right? I think that there is the immediate benefit, if you were to entertain this trade, would be, to your point, getting a guy that suddenly checks a lot of the boxes and addresses some of the current weaknesses with this current squad. Chet Holmgren, you know, a year in, year out DPOY candidate, would not only elevate the Rockets' overall defensive profile, but he also complements them a little bit more offensively, right? He provides floor. No, sorry, I want to backtrack that, because I think in a vacuum, and I think this is important to stay at the top, right? Alperen Sengun is a significantly better and different offensive player than Chet Holmgren, because his job on the floor offensively is completely different than Chet Holmgren. Chet Holmgren is not responsible for creating offense and generating opportunities for his teammates and doing things of that nature. Chet Holmgren is an elite play finisher. He's a fantastic catch and shoot guy, great spacing threat from three or playing above the rim, those different things, but you don't run offense through Chet Holmgren. And that's the key distinction here. But if you're the Rockets, it might not matter, because they also didn't, I mean, you know, they run through Sengun a lot, but through multiple years now, we haven't really seen a team that's been built around Alperen Sengun to truly maximize what his skill set kind of brings to the table. And if they're not going to build or maximize a roster around Alp anyways, then why wouldn't you want to get a piece that's got better, or that I guess complements your overall roster better, be it the defense, the spacing, all those things?
Yeah, I think it's pretty important to say that if you had swapped Chet Holmgren with Alperen Sengun on last year's iteration of the Rockets, it probably would have been a disaster, right? Because it was a team that did not have a point guard, and then you would sub in a guy who really needs a player to feed him. Chet is not a guy who's going to create his own shot. He's an expert finisher at the rim. He's a very strong three-point shooter when he actually wants to shoot the ball, which we'll get into later. Alperen, I think, is a much more effective hub for any team in the league. I think the question is, if you're a team looking to maximize your ceiling in a given year, if you're a 52-win team, if you have a point guard like Fred VanVleet, is maybe Chet the guy that elevates you in the postseason more than Alperen? But I think for every team, Alperen is probably maybe not the more valuable asset, but the bigger floor raiser. I think that's definitely a key to point out here.
Yeah, honestly, that might be the main distinction between these two, is that Alp is a probably the better floor raising player, because you can run offense through him, because you can do so many different things with him offensively. And, despite some of the, struggles from this past season, in particular, the minutes where Alp and Reed kind of shared the floor, it certainly felt like some of the defensive shortcomings were probably a bit more, if we're saddling blame with somebody, a bit more of it goes on Reed's shoulders than Alp, because Alp has shown, historically, that he can be the backbone for a top 5 defense when placed with the right defensive pieces around him. So it's not like he'd be walking into a situation in OKC where they would, their defense would plummet because he's suddenly starting there. They still have Isaiah Hartenstein. And again, Alp has shown that when he's playing his best brand of basketball, when he's motivated, when he's playing well, he can be a at least somewhat plus level defender at times.
Sure, I would say a solid defender. But Chet, I think we should stress defensively, the guy's a human eraser, right? I think if Victor Wembanyama didn't exist, I think that we would all kind of obsess over Chet Holmgren's defense. Now, Alperen has pretty solid stats against Chet, but there have been a few games in the past where Chet, especially this last year, just looks so much bigger than Alperen. I know that might be like a simple point, but when you see Chet out there, all 7-3 protecting the rim, it's so impressive. And these last few games against Victor Wembanyama, against the Spurs, obviously left a pretty terrible taste in people's mouths. I think the real version of Chet Holmgren's a lot better than what we saw against San Antonio, obviously.
Coming up, we'll talk about some of the inspiration for Zach Lowe even proposing this challenge trade, which was Chet Holmgren's, I guess, failure against Victor Wembanyama in the conference finals. We'll talk about that and more coming up here in just one moment.
You ever watch a game and think, man, I bet these fans are going insane right now? On Reddit, you're plugged into millions of fans who are just as hopeful, dramatic, analytical, and loyal as you are. Reddit is the app for authentic conversation about anything and everything. I have to be checking the Knicks subreddit after every single win in these playoffs because every single Knicks fan is going insane right now. 50 years since they've won an NBA title, and the reactions outside of MSG are insane. The ones inside, how much the tickets are going for. I got to know who they're embracing, who's a villain for them now. I got to know everything. It's because it's not just highlights. It's real conversations, different perspectives, and instant reactions as the game unfolds. They have the game threads so you can see reactions in the moment to certain things. It's the ultimate second screen, whether you're checking reactions, catching up on news, or just seeing how everyone else is feeling in the moment. Reddit is where real fans hang out. Download the Reddit app and dive into your favorite team or the Knicks for hot takes, fresh memes, and the group chat that really never sleeps. Download the Reddit app today.
And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. You can get this exact show, Locked On Rockets, without the ads in it if you join our Everydayer Club. So if you love the show, but you don't super love the ads, then check out our Everydayer Club. Click the link in the episode description to learn more. Michael, this whole, idea from Zach Lowe was spawned from Chet's monumental struggles against Wemby in the conference finals, that incredible Thunder Spurs series. It was peak basketball, watching those two teams, arguably the two best teams in the NBA, although the Knicks might have something to say about that, going head to head against each other, right? And there is something to be said for the fact that, to Zach's point, is that when it comes to these head to head matchups, something about Sengun versus Wemby, like Sengun has gotten the better of Wemby more often than not in their direct one-to-one matchups. Now, a lot of people might go back and remember like when the Spurs dumpstered the Rockets back in March this past season. And a part of that was like the game plan and the lack of adjustments because they parked Wemby on a min and then it blew everything up offensively. But in the first half of that game, when Wemby was guarding Sengun was like, he was working him over because Wemby can't actually go. Like saying Wemby can't guard Sengun is unfair because Wemby is ridiculous. He guards multiple people at a time on the floor. He guards everything, but he does struggle with Sengun's size, weight, his finesse, the weird way he contorts his body, all that stuff. And there is something to be said for the idea that from the OKC perspective, right? Like if they're worried about how do we get past San Antonio? How do we get past Wemby, right? You might actually look at Sengun and think, all right, well, that's a guy who's not afraid of Wemby. And from the OKC perspective, they also, without J-Dub out there, they had a very clear lack of offensive creation on the floor. Now, that changes, obviously, with a healthy J-Dub, but there's no such thing as too much offensive creation. And that's why I could see it. Like the more that I keep sitting here thinking about it, I'm like, it kind of makes sense for both teams, but it also kind of don't. It also kind of doesn't.
I think one of the most impressive performances of Alperen's entire career, now it was against more of a baby Wemby, March 2024, he exploded for 45 points and 16 boards against
his
Wemby.
Career high.
And he absolutely basically shoved Victor under the rim time after time after time. Now, I might caution maybe a stronger Wembanyama in the coming years will kind of eliminate that gap in the success that Alperen continues to have. And I'm curious for, Oklahoma City, you mentioned the J-Dub point. If you have a healthy J-Dub and if you have a healthy Shea, just having Alperen instead of Chet, does it kind of clog your spacing a little bit, right? We saw the same exact thing with the Rockets, frankly, where they had two guys who were 2-point specialists, Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun, and their 3-point rate totally plummeted. I'm curious if in Oklahoma City, if you had Shea plus Sengun, if that same thing would happen. Now, I kind of do think Mark Dagnall would lean more into the 3-point revolution than Ime Udoka. It's not really hard to lead into 3-pointers more than Ime Udoka. It's just pretty interesting. I think the fit with the Rockets would be pretty darn smooth because I think Chet Holmgren is a plug-and-play vertical spacer and horizontal spacer. Alperen, he is such an impressive creator. I'm just curious about how the shot profile would change in Oklahoma City. But again, this is just such an interesting trade because there are so many pros and so many cons for each team. And, the salaries kind of work out too. It's a 1-for-1 swap that would work right now, which I think is pretty interesting.
And, you bring up the thinking about like how this would work offensively for OKC, I guess. I don't see it nearly as much of a fit issue for OKC just because like SGA, while he prefers to operate in the mid-range and getting downhill and stuff, he is still a capable 3-point shooter. Like the Thunder can still put 4 elite or above average shooters around Sengun, and they don't have a second like total non-shooter the way the Rockets do in a Min Thompson. But then that's also the flip where that's why it makes so much sense for the Rockets, because if you look at the future of Houston and you're like, okay, well, between a Min and Sengun, if neither of them ever develop a jump shot, who are you going to stick with long term? And while Alp has been the better player as of to this point, or at least I'm only waffling on it because of the defensive side of things, because Amin Thompson was a top 5 defender and has the capability to be the top 3 defender every year for the rest of his career if he wants to. But you weigh in the offensive profile, Sengun, 2-time All-Star. I'll give him the credit, right? He deserves it. He's earned it, or earned the benefit of the doubt to this point. Right. But we know, Michael, I know you know this. I know this. Many people know this. The Rockets internally are very high on Amin Thompson. Like he is probably as close to untouchable as a player can get on a team that is, still very flawed and probably shouldn't have any untouchable players, but that's as close as you get is Amin Thompson. Probably, arguably even more than KD at this point is I would venture that. So I don't know. The more that I keep going back and forth on it, I also think there's an element here for OKC where, you're going to have, they now have Shea and J-Dub and Chet are all on their massive deals, right? And they're all going to continue to balloon and grow. They don't have to worry about ducking the tax, I believe, this next season. But because Sengun is on that incredibly team-friendly deal, he doesn't ever make more than $40 million on this current contract. And that could be really enticing to the Thunder to prevent them from having to blow up their team or having to sacrifice one of their big three because they're worried about the future salary ramifications or being up against the second apron, that kind of stuff.
I think let's talk about the two reasons why the Rockets probably wouldn't make this deal. I think ultimately, in my opinion, because when you kind of put it on maybe the clipboard or the whiteboard, it makes perfect sense. But I think there are two things outside of that. For one, the contract disparity, right? Where Alperen, as we've mentioned, will never make more than $40 million in his current contract, which is pretty wild to me. The last 3 years of Chet Holmgren's deal, 48, 51, $54 million, right? And so if you have a team where you're probably going to have max money for Thompson, you hope maybe Reed Shepherd is a guy who gets another contract. Jabari Smith has a 9-figure contract. Having Alperen's salary is really valuable. Here's the other thing too. I think with the Rockets, they know what Alperen Sengun is about. They know he is, despite some of the struggles, he has the mentality of a primetime player. When you're not around a guy every day like Chet Holmgren, and then you just saw him at the end of a series really struggle. Here's a stat. He became the first player ever in a game 7 to have 2 or fewer shots while playing 30 or more minutes, right? Yeah, that's tough. Tim Legler said he did shrink from the moment. Now, I'm not saying that Chet can't bounce back from that. I'm not saying Chet's not tough, but the Rockets know in their own building what they have. They don't know what the other guy is about. And so while on the whiteboard, while in the 2K world, while in the trade machine world, it does make a lot of sense. It seriously does. I think at the end of the day, the human dynamics of that's going to be a hard thing for the Rockets to shake in this theoretical parlor game.
I agree. I agree with both points that you just brought up. And I'll add one more as to why I really don't think, I just can't see them doing it, at least not yet, right? Sengun is right now, well, depending on who you ask, because Kevin Durant might arguably be their best trade chip. But Sengun is a great trade chip for this Rockets team should they decide that they want to significantly shake things up this offseason. And I think for me, it's really hard to envision them trading Sengun and not getting back a similar caliber of offensive player. Right. Like you could entertain like the Sengun for Jaylen Brown hypothetical, or Sengun for Giannis, or any number of these other like kind of star laden, hypothetical trades that the Rockets might find themselves going after if they really want to try to maximize this next, 2-ish year window with Kevin Durant, and then, looking towards the future post KD afterwards, because they don't have another player on the roster that can shoulder that amount of offensive creation and burden. So if you bring in Chet, and then, we just saw how bad things were this past season with the two primary creators being Sengun and Kevin Durant. And that's really all the Rockets had, because they couldn't really rely on Amen or Reed for consistent offensive creation reps. It worked at times, but it didn't work consistently enough. And so then if you suddenly remove the only other guy that was giving you offensive creation for another kind of, I don't want to lump Chet in with being like a 3-and-D guy, but it's kind of like adding another one of those somewhat limited players who, plays a role and does that role at a very elite level, but that role isn't exactly what this Rockets team maybe needs more of presently. They certainly need more shooting, but the defense wasn't necessarily a major issue throughout the season. It was at times with certain lineups, but when they played the right lineups or the healthy lineups, right, then they had a lot of success defensively, and they were just fine. It really does feel like offensively, especially for the way in which Ime Udoka wants to play, it kind of feels like a trade of this caliber would be counterintuitive to what the Rockets want to ultimately accomplish.
I think you absolutely nailed it, where if the Rockets are going to trade Alperen Sengun, which I'm a little skeptical of, but I think it still is on the table, it's going to be for a capital S superstar like a Jaylen Brown, like a Giannis, where it's a guy who they think will raise them to a championship level, not a guy where they are going to continue to grow him, right? I think they will be accelerating the timeline if they trade Alperen Sengun, not elongating it, if that makes sense.
No, that's a fantastic point. And so I think with that, I think we can almost safely say that this trade is definitely not happening. But if it, Zach Lowe gets all the credit in the world if in like August, like right before training camp, the Thunder and the Rockets are like, let's just do one more like right before training camp trade, because we really like swapping star players between these two franchises, because these two franchises are so weirdly intertwined over the years with all the trades and shared players and history and all that. It is kind of crazy to think about, but we definitely want your thoughts on this hypothetical Alperen Sengun for Chet Holmgren trade. Would you entertain it, or do you understand the both sides and why both sides might be interested in it? Are you completely like vehemently opposed to the idea of trading Sengun for Holmgren? Let us know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But coming up, there are two other names on the OKC roster that are reportedly being shopped around in some trade talks. We're going to talk about those two guys here in just one moment. Patio season is here, and there's nothing better than having an outdoor space that feels comfortable, functional, and gets used. Whether it's a backyard, patio, balcony, or a deck, the right setup can completely change how you spend your time at home. That's where Wayfair comes in. From outdoor seating and patio lighting to grills, rugs, decor, and storage, Wayfair is a one-stop shop for creating an outdoor space that fits your style and your budget. Plus, with over 20 million five-star reviews and Wayfair verified products, it's super easy to shop with utmost confidence. My friend just moved to a new apartment, and she was looking to set up her outdoor, kind of patio area. And on Wayfair, she was able to get herself a nice patio set of furniture, as well as some nice little string lights to really kind of, hit that aesthetic that she was looking for on her back patio. So patio season is here, and these deals aren't going to last. Head to wayfair.com right now to get your outdoor space ready for way less. That's wayfair.com, WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Michael, we got our Sengun Chet discussion out of the way. We'll table that one for now. We'll revisit it if needed down the line. But these two other names here. So it was recently reported that, and I apologize, I can't remember who had the report, but it was out there that the Thunder are open to the possibility of moving on from both Isaiah Joe and or Aaron Wiggins as a means to potentially shed some salary. Both of those guys making right about that $9 to $10-ish, $11 million-ish a year range. And both of these guys were, important depth pieces for the Thunder throughout the regular season, but neither of them really played significant postseason roles is the issue. And some of that is, other guys really emerging. Cason Wallace was just incredible for the Thunder in the postseason. He earned every bit of whatever extension he's about to get this offseason. He earned every cent of that with his postseason play. But you look at the Rockets roster, and clearly this is a team that needs to really revamp spots 10 through 15 on the roster. Like, they need some actual serviceable depth. Now, some of that was because when you lose a bunch of your top end guys, right, your Fred VanVleets, your Steven Adams, and then later in the playoffs, losing Kevin Durant or at points throughout the season, right? No Tari, missing time, things like that. When you lose so many key rotation guys or even starting caliber guys, then it kind of messes up your whole depth chart, because then guys like a Josh Okogie, who was absolutely fantastic this past season, like Josh Okogie, pound for pound, signing a vet minimum with the Rockets was one of the most valuable signings of this entire past season. I really do hope they bring him back this next year. He deserves to be on the roster again. But suddenly a guy like Okogie, who's supposed to be like your 11th or 12th man on the roster, he becomes a starter for like half the season, which is not ideal. That being said, the Rockets do probably still need to maybe look at moving on from names like Jeff Green, Jayshawn Tate. They need some serviceable guys at the end of the bench. How do you feel about either of Isaiah Joe or Aaron Wiggins as possible trade targets for the Rockets, Michael?
First off, I'll try to help you out here. I believe it was Tim McMahon of ESPN. He called them the most likely candidates to be moved in trade. I pulled that up as we were chatting. I think they're both solid options for the Rockets. I think the Rockets would have to attach some degree of draft capital, plus one of the contracts, maybe Clint Capela or Dorian Finney-Smith, to acquire one of those players. I also think it would be nice for the Rockets to have veterans in their mid to late 20s rather than their aging curve into their 30s. The Rockets, they seem pretty creaky. You don't really realize it, but Dorian Finney-Smith, he was banged up, but he's also 33 years old, right? How much springier? He's not going to get springier, actually. I really like Isaiah Joe a lot. I think he's a really strong player. Shot 41, 42% each of the last 3 years. He's a movement shooter. You could see him kind of flaring off screens, playing off the ball. He's a little slight for Ime's taste. He's definitely the thinner guy. He's definitely not a true 3-and-D like Aaron Wiggins. But I really like Isaiah Joe's game. Also, one more thing. That's another Daryl Morey Philadelphia cast-off, just like Julian Champagnie. So not to pile on Daryl, but just another example of some kind of rough around the margins move there for.
Was Champagnie a cast-off too, or did you mean Jared McCain?
I believe that Champagny was also in Philadelphia.
Because then that's 3 cast-offs, because that's McCain, Champagny, and Isaiah Joe, because I knew about McCain already, but I didn't know about Champagny off the top of my head.
Philadelphia 76ers 2022 and 2023 UDFA.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
tough,
man.
tough scene. Yeah, of course.
Daryl, just my goat is washed. What happened?
I think that literally might be the case. But anyway, yeah, I really like Isaiah Joe. Aaron Wiggins is more true 3-and-D. I also think Isaiah Joe will have more value on the market. There's going to be a lot of competitors for the Rockets if they want to trade for him.
For sure. And, and it might get to a point where it's just the Sam Presti special, right? Where he's got a role player that, the Thunder are just like, they've got this role player that could be, easily the 7th or 8th best guy on a playoff roster somewhere else. And he's just getting DNPs or garbage time minutes in the, under the, with the 60 plus win Thunder. And that's kind of ridiculous, right? Somebody, another man's trash is another man's treasure type situation but knowing Presti, he's still somehow going to finesse a 1st round pick out of it. Because if there is a bidding war for Isaiah Joe, I do agree with you. There would have to be some level of draft capital going back to OKC. Now, what amount of draft capital would that have to be? Would it be, could it be a couple seconds? Would it be multiple, 3 or 4 or 5 seconds to get access to him? Or would it be something as just, hey, send us a crappy late 1st round pick, something along those lines? I feel like if it would cost anything remotely close to a 1st round pick, the Rockets would probably turn their noses up at that. But if you could somehow get Isaiah Joe for the combination of a 2nd round pick or 2, and then the inherent salary cap relief potentially of a trade being consummated. Now, the issue with that is that Isaiah Joe is currently, he's got 2 years left on his deal, and one of them is a team option. So he's effectively an expiring deal right now for the Thunder. So if they just wanted to wash their hands of Isaiah Joe, they could just be rid of him at the end of this next season. So now it's not like Sam Presti to lose an asset for nothing. So that's why I do think he is attainable and gettable for a kind of a cheap, I don't know, cheap value, couple 2nd rounders, something like that. But it does feel like there might be a bit of a bidding war for a guy with those type of, that type of skill set, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see the Rockets parting with any first, but here's some good news for Houston if they want to upgrade the margins. Here are some future 2nd round picks they got. They got 2027 via Memphis, no protection. They have the worst of Portland and New Orleans next year. Now, that's going to be a pretty good one regardless, I think. You got a 2029 Sacramento, no protections on that. So I kind of think the idea of Dorian Finney-Smith specifically, who is also a de facto expiring this year, it was definitely a rough signing by Rafael Stone, but at least he didn't guarantee it for 4 years, right? Fully guaranteed this year. Then there's non-guarantees in year 3 or 4. So I could see something where it's whether it be Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, or some other wing out there or guard out there, the idea of DFS plus a 2nd or 2 to get just a warmer, more active, more upside kind of body, that seems to make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and I definitely between the two, Isaiah Joe is the one that is by far the more attractive, I guess, trade option for the Rockets, in large part because he addresses such a significant need, which is more 3-point shooting. But the 3-point shooting doesn't matter if you're not actually going to take or generate the threes in the first place. So this entire conversation might be a moot point. I do want to ask you something just from a philosophical standpoint, Michael. How do you feel about teams not inter-rivalry trading, but just like playoff teams helping other playoff teams out, right? Do you think there's anything to the idea of Presti turning his nose up at the idea of trading one of his role players to the Rockets, or do you think he'd just be like, nah, I want the asset? I
think that Sam Presti probably will just take the asset. I think that I personally, and it's kind of faux GM, I would kind of think about, we have a rivalry, we might play him in the playoffs. I think Sam is probably playing a little more 4D chess, and he's kind of seeing the full scope of things. Also, not to insult the Rockets, but maybe Sam Presti doesn't really view the Rockets as a team he would have to fear in the postseason, right?
You know what? Fair.
He's like, this isn't the Spurs I'm trading with, right? I think that's a fair point in that, especially with a guy like Joe, who I think has some more upside, you don't want to see him kind of explode into a winning player for another franchise. So there is some merit to that for sure. I think from the Rockets' perspective, they wouldn't mind ceding more future draft capital to OKC, because I think Rafael is like, why do I care about 2030? Because I need to win in 2027, right?
That's also a little bit of the concern when you've got, maybe an organization that's, I don't want to say barreling towards, but kind of, the Udoka era has, 3 years under his belt now, 2 back-to-back first-round exits. There's a little bit, when we talked about doing our reviews for both Ime Udoka and Rafael Stone, our season end reviews, looking at both of those guys, I think we kind of came away with the notion essentially that they're unlikely to go anywhere this offseason, but that we could both see the heat being turned up on them depending on the results of next season, right? Where that would be, at that point, we're talking, 7 to 8 years for Rafael Stone in his current role. And then for Ime, it would have been, depending on the outcome of next season, right? That would have concluded year 4 of his deal, or his original deal, right? And at that point, if it's another disappointing first round exit or something to that effect, or if we see another season where there aren't any moves made at the margins, or the Rockets just kind of loosely run it back without any, drastic improvements or anything of that nature, then that's where things get a little, sticky, and you might have to have some tough conversations. But that's also the concern when you have a GM who might be starting to feel some of that pressure, because maybe you start making more short-sighted moves, less about the worry about the long-term, of the franchise, and more about the, hey, I need to win here and now. Normally it's the inverse. Normally the coach is all about, I need to win here and now, because if I don't win, I'm going to get fired. And the GM tends to have more long-term security. So it should be the GM looking at the long-term picture, the future outlook of the team. But if you start seeing Stone making maybe more short-sighted moves or mortgaging some of the draft capital of the future, trying to win now, that's where you start getting in that danger zone territory of okay, we don't want to do an irreversible move that we can't take back because he feels like he's fighting for his job.
Yeah, I think that, first off, both of their contracts having long-term horizons should take some of that pressure off to a degree. But if you had 3 straight round 1 exits, that would look pretty ugly. So I do think there's going to be impetus I think there's going to be a lot of impetus, honestly, to upgrade the margins of the roster. I don't think there's a lot of impetus to change the core of the roster. And that's kind of what Rafael and Ime have signaled all offseason. I think Ime said at his end-of-year press conference after game 6, we have too much duplication on the roster. We're not going to have the same 15 back. But none of them have signaled that they're going to change the core. I haven't really heard too much interest in them changing the core. I think there's been light discussions about Jaylen Brown, to be honest, but I think those have kind of simmered in recent weeks. And I think the Rockets are kind of back in a place where we're getting Fred back. We'll eventually have Steven back. Kevin Durant will be on the team again, and they're going to try to be a 52-win team that has success in the playoffs instead of a 52-win team that embarrasses themselves in the playoffs.
I would very much like that result as well. I think everybody would. So at least everybody probably listening to this podcast, unless you're an OKC fan and you hate listening to this podcast, in which case, y'all fumbled against the Spurs, so get better, get good. I don't know. Just get one more OKC jab in there. But we want your thoughts on everything discussed in this episode. Sengun versus Chet, the possible trade there. Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins as possible trade targets. Give us all your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Michael, you know the drill. Let me know where they can track you down at.
Appreciate that, Jackson. You can find all of my work on cron.com. You can follow me on Twitter at mshap2. You can also follow me on Instagram at Shapiro Sports. And I want to stress, I do not just cover the Rockets. I cover the Astros, the Texans, WNBA, World Cup. If there's something going on in Houston sports, I'll be there. So make sure to check it out.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.